Hi everyone, I am Mark Grigorian and I'm going to be the moderator for this panel discussion. Let me start by saying thank you to everyone for joining us from all parts of the world. And I also would like to say a big thank you to the Future Studio Discussions platform for hosting this event. It's my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished panel. In alphabetical order, they are Noubar Afeyan, founder and CEO, Flagship Pioneering, co-founder of Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, board member of United Worlds College, Dilijan, and Foundation for Armenian Science and Technology. Anahit Avanesyan, Minister of Health of Armenia. Lord Ara Darzi, Professor of Surgery and co-director of the Institute of Global Health Innovation at the Imperial College of London. David Nabarro, Special Envoy on COVID-19 for the World Health Organization. Arsen Torosyan, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Armenia. And Ruben Vardanyan, co-founder of Aurora Humanitarian Initiative and United World College's Dilijan, co-founder and a board member of Foundation for Armenian Science and Technology. We will have the following schedule. Each speaker will have 4 to 5 minutes to make an opening statement, to give a general overview of the situation. And then we will have some time to answer questions from the moderator and discuss some points raised by the speakers. And then the conversation will move to answering questions from the audience. As David Nabarro is going to leave us a bit earlier than usual, we will put forward questions for David Nabarro first. Now, let's start in alphabetical order, just as I introduced the speakers. So, Dr. Noubar Afeyan, the floor is yours, please.
Great, and I assume you can hear me, Mark?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, well, thanks again for doing this a year after we did the first episode of this hopefully soon to finish series about the pandemic and its effect on life and the world. As the audience hopefully will know, my involvement in this pandemic has been through the angle of vaccine development, where a company that I co-founded and chair now entered very early on, January of 2020, into the development process for a vaccine, which ultimately in December of 2020 was shown to be safe and efficacious and began large-scale production. The distribution of that, which has been focused initially on the US and then broadly several countries that had secured supplies very early on, is ongoing, and we're ramping up production and increasingly addressing needs from different places in the world, although we and others are considerably supply constrained given the way demand has been generated and somewhat, let's say, heterogeneously planned for, and we can talk about that maybe in the Q&A portion. The other developments are that we are also quite attentive to what the virus is doing, because the virus is not sitting idle, and as an evolutionary process that first made it dangerous for us continues through modifications to the virus sequence that are happening all the time as it replicates. We're finding new variants emerge that have different susceptibility to either the immune system of those who've been infected or the immune system of those who've been vaccinated. And we are carefully monitoring that with our own vaccine to see that we can continue to offer protection, but also the mRNA technology we've developed lends itself to very rapid response. And so we, within a couple of weeks of understanding this threat, began a second development of a variant vaccine against the South African strain. It's not clear whether we'll need it. It's not clear whether it's the right one ultimately by the time we deploy it, but it's a way to actually see that we can in fact respond and do trials quickly enough to be able to keep up with and ahead of the virus. So the variant side is definitely playing out, and more it's looking to us like there will be the potential need for increases in immune status in certain groups of people, because we're learning, for example, that in immune compromised or immune suppressed individuals, there are different responses potentially as well in cancer. So as we learn about these, it's not about just learning about it and reporting it, but what can you do about it? And through careful administration of boosters, we think that we'll be able to mount a sustained and effective response to whatever the virus does. At least that's the scientific premise that we're working towards. We're also working on the diagnostic side of this. In particular, we think there's going to be an increased need for monitoring of the immune response, something that generally the vaccine world has not really enjoyed or pursued. That is actually how much of an immune response do you have, as opposed to how much immune response did 15,000 volunteers have a year ago, and what does that response mean, and what do you do about it? Now, one thing the audience should also understand, since we've all become in the last 12 months PhD virologists, epidemiologists, immunologists, is that there's a lot we don't know about viruses, human physiology, and vaccine response. A lot. Just because vaccines were coined, over a century ago as terminology, and we have some, doesn't mean we therefore understand them quite the way we may understand an iPhone. And so I think as we learn more, we're going to have to experiment with which aspects of our new learnings do we make decisions on. And so you'll hear more about that from others, I'm sure, as well. But let me pause with that, Mark.
Thank you very much, Noubar, for keeping the time schedule in a perfect way. Now, our next speaker is going to be the Minister of Health of Armenia, Anahit Avanesyan. Please.
Thank you very much. It's my honor to be in this panel and discuss very important topic of fear during this last year. And we always look on statistics, on numbers, and sometimes we just forget the emotions that this pandemic brought to us, to our societies. The only constant which was on the place during this whole year was that there are a lot of questions about this virus, about the measures that we are trying to induce, and about every aspect. And unfortunately, before the pandemic, the overall international community, ministries of health and governments were did not pay the necessary importance to the topic of pandemics, and we were not ready for this challenge. I would like just three words about the current situation in Armenia, the epidemiological situation. As we think, are living the third wave of the pandemic, and now we have a rise in numbers, and hopefully this is the last wave, and before the next wave we will be able to have the vaccination process on the place and can be better prepared for the next upcoming period. I would like to just stress the importance of the smooth and very quick run of the vaccination process, and the developing countries such as Armenia are doing everything and working on all levels to secure the vaccination for our population. We are a part of COVAX facility and working on this international platform to secure, and 2 days ago we had the first batch arrived to Armenia, and now we are working on in the next 2-3 days. We will be ready for much more scaled vaccination. Before that, we had a small quantity of Russian Sputnik, and we have other expectations also. And we see vaccination as the main method to overcome this challenge and to go back to our normal life, because fear and tiredness of this situation is vivid, and people are tired of lockdowns, of isolation, of masks, of every measures, and we need to put all the efforts to bring much more doses of vaccines and do whatever it is possible to include more population and have this level of good vaccination. So in next, the next steps that we are going to keep in mind is also the challenge of anti-vax movement, which is a really big challenge for not only Armenia but for all countries, and anti-vax and not overall anti-vax campaigns, but also very targeted campaigns against specific vaccines, and it's becoming a very big challenge for Ministry of Health, for health authorities. So we are strengthening our PR campaigns, doing a lot of informative work in order to bring to the society the truth, the fact-checked information, and build this trust, so we don't have the situation that we have vaccines but don't have population which is going to be vaccinated. So these are the main concerns of ours, and we are always very happy to hear important news from Mr. Afeyan, and see how he's going to develop the vaccines clinical trials, and whether we will have more affordable and one-shot or light versions for people who have immune system versions of vaccines. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here and to meet with you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Minister. Again, thanks a lot for keeping the time schedule, for being within the time schedule. Now, Lord Darzi, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Grigorian, and thanks everyone for having me back. As you say, it's been a year. I don't think anyone at the first meeting would have predicted that we will still be talking about COVID a year later. Good to see that everyone is well. So I'll start firstly from the early days. I think the challenge at the time was diagnostics, and huge amount of effort went into increasing the supply of diagnostics at different countries. And we were all limited with the PCR machines. It was, I think, a great innovation to bring the lateral flow antigen testing into many countries and many what we will describe as use case, which will allow a degree of freedom of individuals. But at the end of the day, even with the best diagnostic tools, the only thing which resulted on the back of that is we probably for the first time ended up measuring the true prevalence of this virus, because most of us were living in the clouds at the earlier days without actually knowing the true prevalence, because in most instances we were actually testing symptomatic patients rather than asymptomatic patients. And now we know the biggest culprit are the asymptomatic patients when it comes to transmission. So the use case studies have been extremely useful, but at the same time, sadly, many countries, including the United Kingdom, went through at least 2 further lockdowns, very blunt instruments. However, on the other hand, they do work. They do work in certainly in the times in which the diagnostic capacity wasn't great and we didn't have any therapeutic interventions at the time. Interesting things about the lockdown is that this debate that continues by some of our political masters that lockdowns has a huge economic impact, but in actual fact, I think eventually the proof or the evidence will suggest, a lockdown, well, at least a high prevalence of infection has a greater impact on the economy than the actual lockdown. And we just need to see Brazil, as it reported in the last 24 hours, that quarter of the global deaths due to COVID was in Brazil, 25%. That's a tragedy in every way. That's a complete political failure. And sadly, we did see this in some parts of the world. Other things that happened since we talked is the therapeutic side. And again, I'll say this, the UK is very proud of its contribution to the therapeutic trials. The recovery trial coming up with the role of dexamethasone, certainly in reducing mortality. And the modeling that we have will suggest that dexamethasone reduced 20,000 deaths in this country, let alone the rest of the world, but also other intravenous antiviral interventions mostly in intensive care environment, reducing death. That's the evidence base that we did not have at the first meeting, the therapeutic tools that are available to us. And actually, in fact, the UK recruited 1 million patients into therapeutic trials. And that was a great achievement and something to be learning from for future pandemics and other threats, that trials and science is the only way out of any pandemic. Which brings me back to the vaccines, which Noubar very eloquently described. And may I really acknowledge this publicly, what Moderna, under the leadership of Noubar, talking about saving lives, humanitarian initiatives, with the Moderna vaccine, probably will save 300,000 lives across the globe. But beside Moderna, there are a number of other vaccines as well. I think this is, again, mRNA vaccines have proven to be the way forward in the future. There are 6 or 7 other vaccines available. The sad fact is the human behaviors we've seen on the back of vaccines at a national level. Vaccine nationalism has been a big threat to this pandemic. That's very short-sighted approach. I understand Armenia started on the Sputnik. I was surprised to hear today in a press release that a Russian official has suggested if you take the Sputnik vaccine, you should withhold from drinking vodka for 2 months. You can validate this, sir, but I saw it in Reuters. So I thought that was an interesting correlation between alcohol and vaccine. Moving into vaccines and COVAX, the minister very eloquently talked about COVAX. I think it's the responsibility of the Western world to ensure that lower and middle income countries do get the vaccine as soon as possible. The one thing we keep missing, we will never be safe if this virus is circulating around many other countries globally. Noubar did mention the concept of mutations, which viruses do. Coronavirus mutates 1 million times faster than a human, and the mutations will come back to haunt us in the West. So the idea that we can selectively vaccinate parts of the population globally, that policy does not work. And we need to be absolutely clear, the mutations, they may come from countries who have no vaccines, will be the biggest threat facing us in the future. Finishing off one or two other things, even if we get on top of this, let's not forget 10% of the people who've had COVID have sadly this new phenomena called long COVID. And again, science has a big role to address the issue of long COVID. And this is a serious immunological post-infection phenomena, which needs further understanding. And I'm sure the likes of Flagship, Noubar, and many, many scientists across the globe will be looking at that. Also, let's not forget the burden of mental health on everyone, not just COVID patients, but non-COVID patients in the last 12 months. Finishing off with a concept that I could proudly say, working with Flagship and in partnership with Noubar, who is this whole concept of what can we learn for the pandemic to prevent this happening again? And the concept and the mindset which has to change in our political leadership, in our scientific leadership, in terms of our own health security. It's a very topical subject. It probably will come up in the G7, but I suspect beyond that, sadly, human memory is short, but we as advocates of what has happened in the last 12 months need to ensure that this is a never moment again. As we did during the first, second war, we need to look at this in a very different way than we've looked at infectious disease in the past. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, David Nabarro, Special Envoy on COVID-19 for the World Health Organization.
Thank you, Mark. Really, exactly as Ara said, it's an honor to be here. And like him, I didn't think we would be here a year on. I remember the last session, we had it over a weekend, and it was a very important moment of collective understanding. I've got 5 minutes, so here is what I'm going to do. First, I want to tell you a bit about the journey that I've been on. Secondly, I want to tell you where I am now in terms of my understanding of what's happening. And thirdly, I want to look ahead and identify the things that I believe are really important. I am staying quite high level in my analysis, and would be happy to come down a bit more to earth if that is required. First of all, my own journey. I'd like to give you 4 steps. The first step is that most of last year, I spent my time working with others to establish how humanity might come to terms with this virus as a new member of our viral family, and therefore as a potentially endemic pathogen. Secondly, I spent a lot of time thinking about how we navigate the uncertainty as well as the frustration that comes of not really knowing as much as I felt we needed to know when it comes to working out how to live with a potential new endemic pathogen. And then, yes, some learning and adaptation did take place, but I'm not sure it's been good enough. And then that brings me to my 4th point, which is I am constantly surprised that there is so much fear, because in a way, we should be able to learn enough from what has happened over the last 15 months for us to be able to adapt without fear. And yet there is a lot of fear in our world today. Coming back to your subject of defying universal fear 1 year on, my own journey suggests to me that my learning and the learning of many of my colleagues has just not been good enough, and that we are still collectively in an environment of fear when we should be beyond that. And I'm now going to come up with 4 things that I have learnt that I think are potentially things that others might want to apply as well. The first is people are the solution. The virus is the problem. I want to say it again. People are the solution. The virus is the problem. The reason why I say that is that all the evidence that I've got suggests that humans are able to function perfectly well, despite the fact that the virus is circulating, by modifying their own behavior and by being supported through good quality public health services. People could be better at solving the problem if there were reliable, rapid diagnostic tests that could easily be used in people's homes and could be used whenever they want to. So the ability of people to be the solution is fundamentally impaired by the diagnostic test situation, which is really unsatisfactory. Number two, people can be the solution, but they need to be supported by good quality, community-based, locally integrated public health services. Good quality, i.e. they've got to work. Locally integrated means connected with other local bodies. Community-based means close to communities. Exactly what we had to do in many of my Africa operations to deal with infectious diseases. You basically cannot manage an infectious disease unless you can find people who've got it and can isolate them. So public health is actually essential, and the countries that have dismantled public health capacity over recent decades need to get it back in place, and the countries that have got public health capacity should resist all pressures to cut the budget and dismantle it. You need the public health services to stop viruses like this getting a foothold. Number three, getting ahead of this virus is about one, understanding the virus, two, understanding the variants, and three, a completely different approach to vaccines, where instead of seeing a vaccine as a stable chemical, you see a vaccine as a constantly adapted biological product that is matched to the evolution of the virus. And the scientific challenge becomes one of matching the vaccine to the variants really quite speedily, or completely redefining the scientific paradigm so that you can develop vaccines that will deal with all potential variants of this virus. So that virus variants vaccines part is fundamentally about science and technology, accompanied by really good surveillance. And it has to be backed by a global COVID vaccination program. There's no way that we'll get properly on top of this virus without having a properly organized global program like we've had for polio. Fourth is, instead of talking about building back better, we should focus on leaping forward fairer. Leaping, because when you're dealing with exponential problems, you can only get in front of them through a leap. Forward, because we're not going to go backwards, as we heard from the minister. We won't go back to where we were before. And fairer, because COVID reveals inequities and inequalities, and those are becoming more pronounced. And so the future has to be one where there's much greater emphasis on equity and fairness. I personally believe that if we all acknowledge that people are the solution, public health is absolutely indispensable. It's about viruses, variants, and vaccines with a combination of a global program and well-organized science. And in terms of the politics, we've got to leap forward fairer, and we have to include in that a global pandemic treaty, because without that, we'll mess up the rest of this one and we'll be also beaten by the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It was a very valuable intervention, and I hope very much that you will stay until our panelists have the chance of talking, and then there will be just a couple of questions where your interventions also can be similarly valuable. Now, Mr. Arsen Torosyan, who is the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Armenia.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here again 1 year later, and my honor to be with you, my colleagues. Actually, today we are two from Armenian government, and surprisingly or not, I and Anahit Avanesyan have been dealing with COVID since the beginning of the COVID, because she used to be my deputy, the first deputy, key member of the team combating this virus in Armenia. Actually, colleagues mentioned lots of things that I may have mentioned, but I think referring to the topic of this discussion, defying universal fear, I would like to speak about fears that we had when we faced this challenge at the beginning, at early 2020. I always stated that the biggest fear and challenge for us was, and maybe even still is, the level of uncertainties that we faced throughout this challenge. Uncertainties about the virus itself, uncertainties about the response of human body to the virus, uncertainties of the measures that we've been applying to our life, through personal life, public life. And so far, we have this kind of uncertainty still in place. Like Dr. Afeyan stated, whether we will need another vaccines for new strains, or current vaccines may combat the virus pretty well too. Whether we will have, as Minister Avanesyan mentioned, whether we will have another wave after we start vaccination, or we won't have it. So again, we are living this part of our lives regarding this epidemic or pandemic, having a lot of uncertainties. But this is an opportunity too, because we learn a lot because of these uncertainties. We learned as a humanity, as a humankind, to develop a vaccine in this fantastic short period of time. Being a pro-vax member of the society, and having learned a lot about vaccines throughout my career, I know that vaccines like MMR vaccine have been developed in 10 years period of time. The latest vaccines like HPV vaccine developed in about a 10-year time. I'm just amazed how quickly research community, governments, non-government organizations promoted the development of the vaccine in this, again, fantastic short period of time. So having in mind this opportunity, we will have to move forward again by learning how to combat future pandemics, future possible pandemics against coronaviruses or other viruses, having prepared publicly and personally by learning about public measures and personal measures. So this fear have to shift to the desire to learn more and to be better prepared for these kind of challenges. From my side, as a current Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister and being involved in anti-epidemic measures in a bit higher level or a bit broader, I would say that a government of Armenia, and I think all governments in the world, stay alerted as for the last year, and we are not. We don't think that we will have back to a normal life situation very soon, but we have to put every effort we can to have it. And as a most important tool to bring our lives to normal, vaccination is considered a priority for Armenia. And I'm maybe lucky or to be the first person actually vaccinated in Armenia. I got my first shot in late November and the second shot late December. And I can assure everyone hearing us or watching us that it's completely safe and life-saving intervention. And I will put every effort with the Ministry of Health to have as many vaccinated persons in Armenia as we can, considering these challenges for the vaccinationalism, the logistical problems that we face so far, etc. And we just 2 days ago had a discussion within the government. We will try to buy very many doses of the vaccines to ensure this. And again, it's my pleasure to be here, but I will have to apologize. I can't stay much longer, and because we are two of us from the government of Armenia, I think Minister Avanesyan can answer all the questions regarding to Armenian government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And now it's turn for Ruben Vardanyan. Please, Ruben.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Grigorian. And I want to also say, on the behalf of Future Studio and the co-founder with Noubar, all our colleagues who find the time to join us, a very important discussion. And I think it's, I think I am a less relevant person about this subject because I'm not involved in a vaccination, or I'm not involved in the regulation of all that's happening. And maybe I will say a few words from like observer or the person who's been looking from the other side of this all what happened with us. I think we talk about fears, and the fears mainly was an issue about losing the trust to the institutions and to the state. And I think what we face during this year is a question which many people continue asking: what is right process of decision making? What kind of transparency we need to have? What kind of the communication institutions needs to put to the community? And I think David is absolutely correct to mention this importance of between the institution, the state, and the one person building his community or whatever, and for people who can rely and trust each other, because the rumors, the speculations, the fake news, and I think it was dominating a lot in the people's mindset. That's why what I found this year is not only was question how quickly the companies can find a solution. I'm so grateful with the Noubar founded company founded one of the first solutions, and also not how quickly we can start to produce this vaccination. But I think it become also clear what this is the challenge of the overall, I think, society crisis about how and who making decision, who managing this whole situation, how much you can expect and rely from institution like state to be responsible to cover all the problems, and how much you need to be involved in this decision-making process, and how much you need to be yourself committed. And I think the communication was also become clear from my point of view. It was one of the challenges of the explaining what is government doing, why we're doing, and what does the effect, because many people been really scared and continue scared. We can see, despite the vaccination, I have some friends who got the vaccination is continue handling the masks and handling all the gloves because they continue to believe it's a very dangerous. And I think it's balance between this is the attitude to the vaccination, finding the balance between the being scary and staying at home and not doing anything and really don't care about anything and ignoring all the discipline and sanitarian steps. I think it was very critical element of the checking the system, how the efficiency of the system work. And I think we can, unfortunately, looking backwards, say that most of the countries failed to deliver of the really pragmatic approach, and most of things was done or was extreme in one version, or it was not quick reactions. And I think the people overall in many parts of the world feeling is more concerned about way future, not only because of the new virus can come, but the way how and who will be responsible for their lives, how and who will organize the next wave of pandemic will come with new viruses. And I think most of the people was not ready for this type of the crisis, and I think the psychologically and physically changes what happened with us. I think it will be influenced dramatically after the pandemic wave will go over, because one of the key challenges that we will face, I think, it's coming back to the normal life or previous life. It will not happen, and people psychologically will need to accept this new reality, and this new reality will include some of the isolation. And one thing that I can say, being a person who will travel around the world during the years, I don't think we'll go back the same traveling schedule, and it will become, doesn't matter what the vaccination will be done or not. And I think it's a shift of the attitude of the globalization and global integration between the different part of the world, and isolation and separation, which we also found with this pandemic brings to the table. Is why I think it's very interesting to see in the family level, when you, in one hand, you spend a lot of time with your family, and at the same time being isolated from the society, and you got this Zoom online communication, which allowed you to be communicated around the world, but at the same time, you're staying only with your close family members. And the same here, on one hand, you're getting the global virus, and which bring you understanding of how we all interconnect. At the same time, you're trying to be more isolated and nationally build the borders between the different countries. And I think it's unfortunate, because I remember in 1989 when Berlin Wall fell apart, I thought this will be over and we will live in a world where there will be no border, and we can travel and we can meet people. It will no ideological war. Now we see the technological war. We see some ideological, again, confrontation. And we can see how vaccination also become the political weapon. And unfortunately, we can see that despite all the importance of our health, we see there are a lot of political games happening around the vaccination process, which is, for me, being just ordinary person, not giving any positive emotions. I can see, I think, a very dangerous element with the health of the people becoming part of the speculation and becoming part of the trade-off between the different political players. And it's sad, sorry. I think that what we saw also with many people found very, they like a lot to stay at home and not being working and being paid by government, and how long the government can pay this type of the money, and how this model of not working and just sitting in a home and doing nothing, if our economy will survive. It's a good question also, because I think you not go forever, but at least what I was fair in a year ago, but it didn't happen. The economic crisis was much smaller, much less, and I will say deep compared to what we expected. And it was, I think, the gloomy expectation that we had in March when it was the just pandemic started. I think in reality it's much more positive compared to what we found during this last year. But overall, I would say, being like I said, the person who more like looking at from outside, I would say it's a key question. It's the efficiency of the state under big question. The politicization of vaccination is really become a big fear. Communication and transparency and building a trust with the community and people, I think it was definitely one of the biggest failures. And for the economic crisis was not so enough deep and was better managed compared to what we expected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Now, I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we can now say 1 year later that we are living in a world where we have COVID politics, COVID economy. I mean, we have spoken about, David Nabarro just said, COVID nationalism or vaccination nationalism. Where we are, in fact, how long can we live in a world which is defined by a virus? So there should be also response, not only in medical terms and in terms of people's health, but also on the level of politics, economy, and societies. Please, this is a question to all panelists, and please, here you are. Who would like to start? Hmm? Yes, please. Yes, please, Minister Avanesyan.
I think there are, of course, two sides of this COVID new psychology of the countries. On one hand, we have this very good global cooperation of producing vaccines and working regulators, producers, the scientists working together to make possible this very fantastic timeline of production of vaccines. But of course, on the other hand, we have an isolation of countries, yeah, and trying to go back to the from the globalization. Of course, I think this is a big problem, and isolation of the individual, of the groups, and of the countries makes the challenge very difficult. As it was mentioned, we need to see the solution in the people and in cooperation and in overcoming the fears, and solidarity is the key very important part to the solution. We saw that at first many countries were fighting for the masks, for the equipment, for different things. Then we have seen we are seeing this fight in vaccine procurement, and I think this is a very big challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. If nobody wants to continue this topic, then there is a question specifically for Mr. David Nabarro, which is the World Health Organization going to revise international epidemic policy?
Thanks very much indeed. Just yesterday, 23 world leaders, including the Prime Minister of the UK, President of France, and the Chancellor of Germany, produced an op-ed, as it's called, in the Daily Telegraph UK, saying that actually to deal with these kinds of issues, the current treaty arrangements between nations are not good enough. What we are working with is something called the International Health Regulations, developed in 2005 after 2 years negotiations and adapted because of general frustration on the part of governments about the way in which WHO handled SARS in 2003. And the reality is that although this is a powerful treaty, actually the member states of the World Health Organization limited the power of the Director General to unilaterally suggest travel restrictions and other such things in the case of infectious diseases. And instead it was an arrangement was put in place that an emergency committee would be convened, and only that committee, based on representatives from around the world, would have the power to declare a public health emergency of international concern, which is the highest level of alert. I personally think the international health regulations are not good enough for today's world. They don't give the World Health Organization power to go into countries unilaterally, and they put a lot of restrictions on the freedom for the Director General to act on behalf of the world. He is required to receive agreement from countries, particularly from countries where there are cases of disease being discovered. So this has to be redone. But at the same time, the mood between governments to change the powers available to this particular intergovernmental body, it's not a good environment. We've just come out of a period where the United States was planning to withdraw and was going to withdraw and was in the process of withdrawing from the World Health Organization. That is the organization that pays 20% of the budget of the organization was going to walk out. And it's pretty difficult for a multilateral body to survive without the US presence, especially in this area where most of the work in building up capacity for pandemic preparedness was financed by and driven by the United States, and indeed driven by the White House, which had a health team, an admiral called Admiral Zima, in the office of the National Security Advisor in the White House. So with this US shifting and now coming back, but only recently, you know, we are left in the situation, Mark, of saying to ourselves, what is going to be the global arrangement? Will the US be back in? And how strongly? Will the US be back in supporting an approach to this kind of problem that is an equity approach with the whole world as the constituency? Or will the US be back in, but looking after the US citizens first and foremost? Something that I'm sure everybody here has views on. But in my view, just in case it's helpful, we're not going to get out of this pandemic, and we won't deal adequately as a world with subsequent pandemics unless we can return governance in the face of infectious disease threats so that it is truly global in style and less local in style. And I mean, Noubar may completely disagree with me, but from my perspective, to have a small number of countries going for 100% adult immunization, when we've got a situation of very high risk and mortality rates amongst health workers all over the world, is just wrong. In every respect, the current approach on vaccines is wrong. And I feel more confident that Ara also said it. But we need to really recognize this is just absolutely the wrong way to go about dealing with a global threat, is to have greed from a small number of national leaders taking all the vaccine that there is and making it impossible for COVAX to work. Because COVAX can work if all countries are prepared in the first instance to get their vaccines through COVAX. COVAX cannot work if it's just a place where the crumbs go after the rich countries have taken whatever vaccine is available. So we have to have a completely different way of dealing with these kinds of problems, which is not simply those countries that have wealth taking the assets that are available and giving them to their people. That's not the right way to go about this, especially not given the impact of this virus on health workers and other high-risk personnel throughout the world. We need global equity, and we need a treaty mechanism that makes sure that we won't have the current awful arrangement being carried on into the future.
Thank you very much. Yes, Noubar, please.
Let me just comment on what David said. Of course, it's difficult to agree, and it's difficult to disagree with the notion that there could be much better ways to govern this topic globally, and that somehow, obviously, the manufacturers would prefer a small number of countries getting the vaccine versus larger ones. Of course, as global citizens, we would like this process to be transparent, fair, equitable. And in fact, it might surprise David to realize that I have heavily advocated to the US government for months that the US actually secure the total supply needed to vaccinate the world, and to basically do that because they have the resources, and not spend the next 6 months trying to figure out how to get other countries to coordinate and take their pro rata share and all that. Even that, we don't have time for. And so at a personal level, as someone who works in humanitarian relief through many other projects, I fully support the notion that this should be done at a global level, and perhaps sooner than when the whole adult population is vaccinating in any given one country. So I have no issue with any of that. But I would say that the reality is we live in a world of elected governments for whom very little is more important than what affects their votes. And in that kind of a system, I think it's hard to fathom the kind of just, contrarian thinking it would take to actually put self-interest behind the interest of the whole. We are all looking for this type of leadership, and I hope David, you take it as I'm supporting your point, not only in vaccines, but in food, in poverty, in refugees. I mean, there is no place where the governance in the world is actually working equitably, fairly, and the vaccine is just another painful demonstration, in my view, of the exact same thing. But maybe to add one other observation, because I do worry a little bit about what structure then could be better. I think that my observation in this, I've been exposed to a lot of things that were new to me over the last 12 months in this regard. I would say that one of the things that happened over the first 6 months of this pandemic is that the entities that were formed, COVAX included, to deal with coordinating purchases were frozen by the same uncertainty as plagues us today. They didn't know which vaccine would work, when, which vaccine would have what cold chain requirement, and they were hoping that they would play one vaccine against the other to drive the price to the bare minimum. Let me make a point as a private citizen that in a world where we're paying $100 a test, getting tested over and over and over again, many times just so that we don't feel like we're exposed, and that we're arguing over whether a vaccine should be $9 or $6 or $7, is economic malfeasance, in my view. Because at the end of the day, protecting people, however we can get it done, and arriving at a solution that we can build from is much better than the time that has been spent trying to hope that one lower cost vaccine will get approved sooner so that the other vaccines may not be needed. So I'll simply say, I don't have my hat on as a chairman of Moderna, I'm talking as a private citizen, but a lot of time, and I'm afraid lives, have been wasted in the process of coordinating purchases in the hope that somehow an even lower price could be attained. And frankly, I don't know what the right price is, but compared to a $100 diagnostic test, it's hard to fathom that a vaccine should be $1.50. Just, I don't want to get into the debate now, but I just want people to realize just how problematic the whole topic has been. And may not make me popular to say it, but I'll make the observation that the Western world, just like David said, should step in and fix this so that people aren't wasting their time trying to figure out how to play manufacturers against each other and not getting vaccines out to places like Armenia and elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Noubar. Lord Darzi, would you like to add something?
No, I think David raised an important point, and I think Noubar responded to that. This is not a manufacturing problem. In actual fact, let's give you one example. I mean, AstraZeneca came up with a vaccine which was supposed to be the vaccine that is going to go into, I mean, you've seen the nationalistic, the political debacle on that. And this is not the manufacturers. The manufacturers have done this in good faith at an unbelievable speed. There is no record in humanity since vaccines were created that a vaccine could be developed in such a short time. These are the people who we should be celebrating. And the sad fact here is we're seeing exactly the same behaviors, whether it's a vaccine or, as Noubar said, whether it happens to be a tragic natural disaster, whether it happens to be any other threat that sadly lower and middle income countries have faced. We've become more and more impotent in this area at a political level, and something needs to be done about that. Even WHO struggled with some of the countries in terms of implementing some of their great leadership in managing this pandemic. From day one, there was rebellion against some of the advice, and that is the issue that we need to tackle.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. Yes.
I'm so sorry. First of all, thank you, Noubar. I would like one day to have an hour or two more on this, because I actually think that it would help me to understand more about how you think about this. I'm struggling to try to keep COVAX working. I'd want to know what the problems are with COVAX from your perspective. Right now, it's really hard to get vaccines into COVAX. And we also can't get manufacturers to provide their full data sets for getting emergency use licensing done in WHO. As you probably know, WHO has only given the EUL to Pfizer-BioNTech, the Serum Institute, and to SK, the two versions of Oxford AstraZeneca. Despite the fact that Gamaleya and Sinopharm are being used all over the world, we haven't been able to process their information, and Moderna have not submitted, according to my information. So getting a COVAX that works using the model is going to be difficult. And I would really, really value time with you, but I have to leave now. I'm late for my next meeting by 15 minutes. But I do think the future of the world will be hugely influenced by what happens in the next 6 months over access to vaccines. And I talk a lot to African leaders, and I think people like Macky Sall of Senegal and Paul Kagame of Rwanda are at the vanguard of unforgiving leaders. And I think when the West needs help from Africa, the way the West has treated Africa on vaccines will be remembered. And that may or may not be important, but I just think that it's important sometimes to just imagine what the history might look like in 10 years' time when 221 is described. And I personally belong to that group that feel that there is a massive failure of leadership. And I think you feel as well, Noubar.
Oh, yeah.
I know Ara does. And this is not trivial. For me, this is not trivial. I'm thinking of my grandchildren. I think that the world will be a less secure and decent place because of the general style with which UK, European Union, United States, Canada, United Arab Emirates, Israel, and others are dealing with this. I hope you don't mind if I go, but I don't get to sit in the same panel as Noubar very often, and he's a very important person in this.
David, let me just say, I'll reach out to you tomorrow. I would very much welcome it. Yeah. And I'll leave you with the thought that well beyond our means is the ability to develop a vaccine for the kind of behavior leaders are showing. Because if we could immunize against that, I think we could solve this problem pretty quickly. I cannot agree more. But you're going to need to work on that vaccine, and I'll help you.
Okay. Dear man, thank you. Mark, thank you. Thank you. And everybody, thank you very much.
Very important. And I love the emotional way you were presenting the problem.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. That was a mistake.
It wasn't a mistake.
Failure of self-control. Sorry for that.
It wasn't a mistake at all. It was just in place and very well.
Never grew up. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Ara. Thank you. Bye.
Now, continuing the topic in the conversation, Ruben, would you like to add anything? Minister Avanesyan? No. Thank you. Now, there is another question which also is somehow connected to the issue of vaccines. This is a question coming from one of our viewers. If this virus will have variances, and sure it will, I mean, it has already, Do we have any guarantee that biological products, vaccines of first generation, won't become useless? Please share your vision.
Well, Arnold, do you want to go or do you want me to?
Noubar, you go ahead, please. Yeah. You know a lot about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the reality is, as I mentioned in my initial comments, that biology and life is something about which we don't understand enough to offer guarantees. And so there really is no way that one could use that concept. On the other hand, the odds are very favorable that the mutations that the virus can muster are definitely subject to being counteracted by various antibody responses in a human that need to be provoked. Either they're provoked by the original vaccines, or we will provoke them with varied vaccines. But there's no reason to believe that the human immune response cannot fight back successfully this virus and all its mutants in time. Is that a guarantee? No. But I do think, look, the one good news, if we talk about science, is that our understanding has gotten to a point, and computers have gotten to a point where it might interest the person asking the question to realize that in a computational way, and we have a large group working on this, we have already simulated all the variants that the virus could make, that could, on the one hand, be successful, meaning it could survive, and on the other hand, could escape the immune system. And we are using that computational approach to figure out what are the antibodies that we need that are the broadest protective against this particular virus. The good news is that same methodology will be used, I can assure you, in influenza, in flu. For a long time, we've assumed that we only can make 50-60% valid, effective vaccines against the flu. But I actually would predict that what we're learning in this case with coronavirus and how to fight the mutants will inform certainly other highly mutable respiratory viruses like influenza. So, long way of saying, I believe that the weapons are there to counteract, but guarantee is a little too strong because we don't know everything about life.
You're muted, Chair.
If there is no other response, Lord Darzi, if you want to add something.
No, thank you. I think Noubar said it very eloquently. It remains on the risk register, whether it's COVID or influenza or any other infectious disease. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, there is another question which is coming from many of our viewers, and it's about Armenia. It's about why is the vaccination process so late in Armenia? Please, Minister Avanesyan.
It's very important to say compared to which countries it is too late. So, we see, and we have discussed today, that many countries, developing countries and self-financing, and countries who are going to get the vaccines as donation, they are waiting for their turn. And we were, of course, anticipating last year entering the COVAX facility to have the vaccines on in February, but unfortunately the processes are going really very hard. And on one hand, we have the contracts, but on the other hand, we have these delays in import. And as I have said, this Sunday we had this first big batch of AstraZeneca imported into Armenia, and we are going to start on a much more big scale of vaccination. Of course, COVAX is doing, I think, incredible job. But during last 3-4 months, the processes were very, very going very difficult, and unfortunately, we don't have the sufficient amounts now to talk about the vaccination for 10 or 15% of the population, which was the target for us. But of course, we are also working bilaterally and hope that that through other channels we will be able to have vaccines secured and procured for Armenia. And I'm happy that from now we can start the vaccination.
Thank you very much. Now, there is a question to all panelists by Diana Arsenian. The question is like this: EU is now considering jointly producing Sputnik in Italy and Germany. How likely is this to impact the global supply chain of Sputnik? Please.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe I will start because I'm not sure I can answer this question professionally enough. Well, but what I want to say, and it's all story around the vaccines, Chinese, Russian, AstraZeneca, and of course Moderna and Pfizer. We are, I think, entering in something which I don't like because it's becoming so politicized and so becoming used for, again, not to how to make people health and how to save their lives and how to make the as soon as possible is while the pandemic going down, but more about how much influence you're getting, how much money you're earning. And this is, I think it's the one we should, Noubar is correct the race from, and by the way, it's not only about the vaccine, for all the chain of the, we're talking about around the, by the way, vaccine is so many other elements is happening. For example, I will say the transportation to the, I'm the board member of one of the biggest cargo airlines in the world, and I can see what's happening in the pricing there, and I can see what's happening in every element of it. So, and I will say it's something which I don't know where is the solution, because the regulation of the pricing, we all know, I'm coming from Soviet Union, it was not good to have a government planning system, but in some way or another, we are facing, I think, serious clash of the human interests, human values, and the economical greediness and political willingness to influence and use the vaccine. And so I would say as soon as anyone can produce, it's better for the people. And if, as soon as it's accepted by the tests, it needs to be accepted anyway. Any place can be produced, and as soon as we can deliver to the people, it's best. And in my view, again, but I know it's easy to say, it's difficult to do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, there is another question to all panelists. Has the COVID-19 as a phenomenon brought the world closer together, or has it divided the world? Please, Lord Darzi.
Well, I think, sadly, it has divided the world more than it has united the world. But I think on reflection, and I'm sure many will reflect on the back of this, will probably come to a single conclusion that a global collaboration in tackling a pandemic, which knows no borders, which knows no nationalities, which knows no, is the only way to tackle something like this. But I don't think the world was ready for this. And whenever you have an unplanned, which is what a pandemic is, an emergency, that sadly is what happens. I think there's been certain alliances between different countries, but I think overall, even without alliances, and I'll give you an example, would be EU. even within the EU, which is an alliance, as we all know, there has been some significant challenges. And it's mostly about the vacuum of political leadership. I mean, let's be very frank about this. That's what that is. And I hope we learn the lessons from this. And these are not new lessons. We've seen them in other contexts in the past. And it's critical that multilateral organizations need to mature and develop more, need to have, WHO would be a good example. The starting point wasn't strong with the WHO at the beginning, which is unfair. That's based mostly on what happened during Ebola and subsequently. But instead of fixing the problems the cracks that we noticed during pandemic, by the way, this is not the first pandemic. We've had 4 in the last 20 years. And if you take a couple of the lessons that could be learned from here, we could have eased some of the challenges and difficulties that has faced the world globally. So the answer is, it's sad fact, but I think the solutions are obvious, and we need a greater leadership at the multilateral institutions to bring people together.
Thank you. Noubar, please.
No, I was going to just say, Mark, if you wouldn't mind it, and that's why I'm asking for your permission, I think it would be a shame for us if we run out of time and not reflect on one issue we really haven't talked about, which is not only the economic, physical health and death toll this whole thing has taken on people, but the mental health toll that I think we have really not talked about sufficiently by a long shot, and which I think is going to put a further long COVID a challenge on all of us, whether we got infected or not. I think that the signs of this are coming up everywhere, at every age group, and this is not just about, well, it's like a seasonal affective disorder. You'll get over it when the sun shines again. This is a major trauma that we're all undergoing. It will be relived over and over and over again. In the US, when there was a trauma with 9/11, by the replaying of that trauma of one day and 3,000 people, the country was changed dramatically. We had many, many days, weeks on end of much more than 3,000 deaths. And that will be a huge scar politically on every system that touched this. So I'd simply say, as we think about how do we get on from here, we're going to have to realize that I actually believe that this whole notion of returning to a normal will be not only physically slow, but mentally extremely slow. And I think we will be lost. I don't want to sound negative, and this is well outside my area of expertise, although vaccines were outside my area of expertise a couple of years ago too. So it turns out that you can still have a point of view about things and not be an expert. I really believe, and I sense around me, a level of disequilibrium and turbulence, which will not be easy to fix, whether it's going to be massive deployment of psychologists, whether kind of philosophers will have to offer some way of making sense out of this, whether religion will have to step in a major way, various religious groups. I think we're not talking remotely. Now, of course, you could say, well, we shouldn't be because we're still in the middle of it. But just like we were not ready for the pandemic of the viral attack, I don't think if we're not ready for the pandemic of the mental health attack that we're suffering, we'll be able to deal with it when the virus subsides and we're left with its horrible, horrible damage to our psyche. So I just want people, governments at the minister level, to really start talking about this more. This is not about sympathy. This is about post-traumatic stress at the level of a globe, not of just the fighters and their families who were engaged in a war. So again, sorry, I don't want to aggrandize this. I just think it's being missed. It's not, politicians don't want to touch it because they just want, handouts to fix this somehow, or vaccines. But there's no vaccine for the brain, and this is going to be a very, very major issue.
Yes, please. If you don't want to continue the topic, then I'll probably say a couple of words. That we have a history with the Spanish flu pandemic in the beginning of the 20th century, which was there and which had its mental impact on the whole population for generations. And probably we should think about the same impact and the same thing now when we are in the middle of COVID pandemics. But we are slowly running out of time. And if there are any closing remarks, then I would be very happy to hear them. And as we started with the alphabetical order, let's now go in the reverse order and start from Ruben Vardanyan, please.
I think I want to just say one important point about what we are talking. We are talking not only about the pandemic and virus, but we're talking about entire transformation of the world, which is happening simultaneously with technological revolution. We see the social revolutions. We see some transformation of our societies. We see the role of the state is changing. We see the fight between the state and network. We see the issue about efficiency of the international organizations. We see the somewhere around the core crisis of human identity and values, and people staying alone, and it's becoming new reality and psychological fearness about the future. So I say what we need to understand when we're talking about pandemic and virus, it's not so much only about this healthcare issue like the virus, but also much broader and much more complicated picture, which I totally agree. And I think it's also for me to become clear what expecting what somebody else will do for you everything. It's I think it's illusion, and it's a question what kind of dialogue we need to establish between whom and with the one person or community and the state, and which way it needs to be operating, how we can find collaboration and cooperation, not the fights between the institutions and societies. Because one thing we see in Holland, in France, people really fighting and feeling very aggressive, putting very aggressive emotions against what's happening, the whole government regulating everything. And I think it's one of the core elements how we can create a dialogue in this new reality with the transformation of the world becoming very critical for all of us. If we want to see the future of our kids differently, we need to make a lot of efforts for transformation institutions, communities, communication networks, and the way how we handle all these crises simultaneously.
Thank you very much. Lord Darzi, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think most of it has been said. I think, we will have a COVID post-mortem, and I hope the findings of that will be evidence-based, and I hope that will drive many countries to think slightly differently or act in a very different way that we've seen in recent times, certainly over the last 12 months or so. And I hope we see the back of that with a future that is brighter, but also based on collaboration, based on regard, and hopefully, definitely would like to see Armenia certainly in a stronger place which has done a remarkable job, but a stronger place to fight this, such an insult in the future.
Thank you very much. Minister Avanesyan, please.
Thank you very much. And I think coming back to the notion of today's discussion, the fear, the emotions and the mental health issues are very, very important. And as Mr. Afeyan said, we of course need to take care about the physical well-being and physical aspects, but also, especially in Armenia, for us, it's very important to have this opportunity of recovering. We have a post-war situation, we have a post-COVID and in-COVID situation now, and we need time and efforts and work to be done in order our society can reveal and be cured. So thank you very much. I think it's very important to talk to each other, and the isolation that COVID has brought to our world makes this fear even worse. So these type of talks and discussions help us to come back to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Noubar, you started the conversation. You are about the last to talk.
Well, thanks for everybody who participated. Look, I have not said much about Armenia today, but let me end my comments by saying what we all know, which is that April is the heaviest month of the calendar for Armenians because of what it signifies, the commemoration of the Armenian genocide. And there's a lot connecting our experience with the Armenian genocide with what we're going through now as a people, post-war, post this pandemic afflicting us. And actually the silver lining, in my view, is that we actually have lived centuries, if not certainly the last century, of fighting back, surviving, reviving, getting others to help us stand up on our feet and actually recover. And I think that the same senseless feeling about the 1.5 million people who perished a century ago is now being felt in the world by the millions who perished senselessly in the hands of a virus, maybe, but through the act of a lot of governments and various other decision makers who actually have unfortunately allowed this to happen. And I'm sure somebody will be denying that all this happened 50, 60 years from now. I'm sure all the things we've gone through will be experienced on the back of what we're just living through. And I say that as an invitation to Armenians who are rather expert at going down this journey, that perhaps we should think about what are the psychological ways in which you recover. The feeling, for example, of arbitrariness, that you survived and the person next to you being marched to death died, and the guilt one feels. That same guilt is felt by people in hospitals where the person next to them died of COVID and their COVID didn't kill them. How's that person going to live? So I would say our experience, the April month, should actually cause us to remember that we can actually do something perhaps more, share our experiences like we have to other genocide surviving countries like Rwanda, but now share it at the level of the world and say, here's the path to go from that level of devastation to coming back, feeling like you can actually contribute to the world, etc. So I'll leave you with that thought that I think we have a slight added responsibility of being survivors to help other people figure out how to survive this kind of thing.
Thank you very much, Noubar. And just a couple of words from me. Adding to what Noubar said, I just want to remind that during the conversation, we have discussed the road which we have passed through the last year, when we started from understanding where are we, what is pandemic and what is COVID-19, then going to developing vaccines, and now to the problems of distributing vaccines, access to vaccines. We have also spoken about the greed of the big countries and the return to normal. How difficult will it be, and what is going to be the post-trauma situation? I hope very much, ladies and gentlemen, that our next meeting will not be 1 year later on this COVID. It will be much earlier, and see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.